Hello, Netrunner fans, Willingdon here, and I'm excited to be with you again for another data pack review. I think I just completed my review of the Spaces Between about 2 weeks ago, and I'm already on to another data pack, this time for First Contact. It seems that the release dates for these two packs were kind of smushed together because they took so long to release Upstock. I'm just excited to have another pack, and I'm also excited about the prospects of most of this data pack cycle being available by the time we get to Worlds. A quick note before we begin: based on some of your feedback and my own feelings, I'm going to ditch the numerical evaluation system and just kind of talk about the cards. I don't think it really makes a whole lot of sense to give a card a rating outside of context, since the game that we play is so focused on card interactions. It doesn't really make sense to just say this card is a 4-star card. So I'm not going to do that. Well, let's get right into it. I'm going to start with the corporation cards. And the first one we have is a new piece of ice for HB. It is 0 to res and 0 strength. It's called IQ. It's a code gate. And the res cost of IQ is increased by 1 for each card in HQ. IQ has +1 strength for each card in HQ. End the run is its only subroutine. 2 influence. So the first thing I think about with this card, and I'm sure most people are thinking about, is cerebral imaging. It's pretty realistic for cerebral imaging to have 10 to 15 cards in their hand, and it's not by any means inconceivable for them to have 20 or 30 cards in their hand. So in other words, the prospect of a 30 strength code gate within the run is pretty neat. I'm not 100% sold that it's good. In cerebral imaging, we're going to have to pay the increased res cost for each card in our HQ. So ideally what we're going to do is try to res this card when we have more money than we have cards, and try to spend as low of a res cost as we can. And then later in the game, the card is going to become extremely high strength and will be really hard to deal with. It doesn't seem like it's going to be that hard to mitigate the drawback, the increased res cost, in the cerebral imaging deck. This card seems pretty good. I'm excited to see what people are going to do with it, and I'm excited to see HB Ice that work differently than all the other HB Ice we have. Moving on, we have another HB card. This one is an asset. It's called Elises Toy Box. It's a ritzy asset, 4 to res, 4 to trash, 2 influence. Its only ability is triple click, res a card, ignoring all costs. Well, this is pretty cool. This card's been spoiled for a long time, and this card just seems fun. I just love this card. The big green Magic player in me just really likes this card. The idea that I can res my Wotan or my Heimdall 2.0 or my huge ice by just spending a whole turn. This is a really neat card. I had mentioned in my Spaces Between video that I thought an emerging archetype was the HB Stronger Together that played a lot of Bioroids, and it played the new Wayland Grid, and it now could potentially play this card as well. This card's been spoiled for a long time. We've known about this card for a long time, and this has been a card I've been eyeing for Stronger Together for quite a while. I've actually played with it a little bit much prior to this release, just to kind of see if it was as good as I thought it is, and it is, frankly. This isn't going to be a 3 of card. This is probably going to be a 2 of, maybe a 1 of card, and the main stage of the game that we're going to be using this card is going to be towards the end, where we don't really have anything better to do but click for credits or try to generate credits so we can res our ice. This is instead going to let us just outright res that ice, not having to worry about, just generating the credits with clicks. I think there are going to be big HB decks that are considering this card over maybe like Eve Campaign or a different type of asset economy. This certainly works at a very specific stage of the game, like I was saying. So this isn't going to be your Adonis campaign killer. We're not going to be playing this over Adonis campaign because Adonis campaign is really strong early in the game, whereas this card really just isn't. I think we're going to see an HB deck, probably the stronger together, that plays the domestic sleepers along with Archer, and then just plays 3-point agendas to try to score 2 3-pointers and then the domestic sleepers. And that deck is going to really like to play this Elises Toy Box because it'll be another way to res the Archer without having to forfeit an agenda. I think this card is probably going to be better than Bioroid Efficiency Research in most of the HB decks that are going to play it, and it's almost certainly better than Oversight AI as well. I really like this card. Even if this card doesn't end up being good, it is just so much fun. I just love to have a card like this in the pool. This is really neat. The high res cost kind of hurts it. The fact that it's an asset means you're going to have to put it on a server that probably isn't your scoring remote. But the 4 to trash really saves this card. And when I see this card, the thing I think is print more cards like this. This is really fun, even if it doesn't end up being competitive. All right, the next card we have is a Gentecki piece of ice. I believe it's pronounced Kisune, which according to Wikipedia means fox in Japanese. It is a 2 res cost, 3 strength, 2 influence card, and it is a mythic trap type. The only subroutine is the Corp may choose a card in HQ. The runner accesses that card. If he or she does, trash it. So first of all, it's a trap type, which is kind of the unofficial 4th type of ice next to Barrier, Code Gate, and Sentry. Trap ice are difficult to break. They can really only be broken with the AI breakers that just say they break any subroutine. The card's also mythic, which I believe has yet to matter. I guess we'll see more on that subtype in the future. Now, essentially what this card does is it makes the runner access some other nasty that you already have in HQ. So first of all, this card presupposes that you're going to need to play like Snare or Shock or other nasty things. Now for Gentecki, that isn't a whole lot of a requirement, but it is going to keep this card out of a certain type of Replicating Perfection deck. I think it's going to keep it out of a bunch of the more Glacier-oriented Gentecki decks. As much as I want to like this card, unfortunately, I think this is just 3 more cards that are going to sit in that section of your Netrunner box that is conditional Gentecki ice that you're not going to put in your deck. I would very, very much like to be proven wrong about that. Moving on, we're going to talk about a Gentecki upgrade. This is 2 to res, 5 to trash. It's called Port Anson Grid. It's 2 influence. It is a region, so only one of those can be in a server. The runner cannot jack out while running on this server unless he or she trashes one installed program. Well, the first thing I notice is that the runner gets to pick the installed program that's trashed, so that kind of sucks. But the bigger thing is, how much is their inability to jack out actually going to matter? I'm trying to set up this scenario in my head that is just the perfect scenario, and I can think of situations where you could get a certain combination of ice that would flatline the runner when you surprise them with your Port Anson Grid. So I can see that this card has the ability to flatline the runner. You know, they run into Chum, and now they're suddenly forced to continue, and now they're taking net damage, and maybe now they can't break the ice. I see that this can do something. I just am not eager to try to do that thing. I think that if you're playing Gentecki and you want to flatline the runner, you already have very good tools to do it. Are you going to want to fool around with conditional ice that might flatline them? One thing I will say is that a lot of the popular Gentecki decks already play net damage ice, So a scenario I can think of is maybe they like run into your Koma Inu, lose their whole hand. Now they have to access a card. So maybe they'll hit a shock or a snare or even just an agenda if you're playing Personal Evolution. But the opponents that I play against don't just run into Koma Inu and lose their whole hand. That, especially with an unresed upgrade on the server. This is not a scenario I see coming up, and I personally am not eager to try this card in Gentecki. I think maybe an HB deck that's focused on brain damage, there's some potential there. I'm not eager to try this card. I am very anxious to see somebody else do something with this card, but I personally will not be spending a lot of thought on it. Moving on, we got an asset from good old NBN. It's 0 to res, 4 to trash, 3 influence, the News Now Hour. Like I said, it's an asset, it's a cast, and the runner cannot play current events, because this show is all about current events, because it's the News Now Hour. This is not a very good card. I think maybe, based on some spoilers that I won't talk about here, there will be currents on the runner side that are so good that it would be worth considering something like this. I think if you have a mass asset deck, like maybe like a near-Earth hub that plays like a ton of assets, maybe you would think about playing this card in that style of a deck. Probably not. We're going to need to see some really good runner currents for this card to even be worth considering. And the other thing I'm thinking is, do you want to play this over like targeted marketing? You could just play targeted marketing and just neutralize their current. Plus, another way to neutralize their current is to score an agenda, and I hear that NBN is pretty good at scoring agendas. Okay, moving on, we have another NBN card. This is an operation, and it is a current. It is 3 to play. It's called Manhunt, 3 influence as well. Now, this one says, the first time the runner makes a successful run each turn, trace 2. If successful, give the runner a tag. The two big remarks I have are, NBN is already pretty good at this, and it's only going to work if they're able to make successful runs. So this would be good in a deck that played, say, tons of assets, or played very low ice, or something like that, where you're just going to let them make successful runs. Now, of course, if you're playing that kind of deck, it's going to be easier for them to score, which is going to mean it's going to be easier for them to trash Manhunt when they do. I don't know. I'm not sold on this card. I would like to see this card in action. I don't immediately think it's unplayably bad. I just don't see how to play this outside of maybe like a mass asset deck. It seems like if I'm going to try to tag and bag the runner, then I'd rather just play SEA Source. Okay, so the next card we have is a Wayland Piece of Ice. It is Wendigo, 2 to res, 4 strength, 2 influence, Code Gate Morph, the first of its kind with the morph. Wendigo can be advanced. While it has an odd number of advancement tokens on it, it gains barrier and loses Code Gate. And then it has 1 subroutine. Choose a program. The runner cannot use the chosen program for the remainder of this run. So first of all, the morph thing is really neat. The turning from a Code Gate into a barrier. You have some control on what type the card is. That's pretty cool. The effect, the subroutine, seems to be predicated on the idea that the ice is going to be in front of another good piece of ice. Kind of like Inazuma or Chum or a few other ice. I'm assuming the way this card works, because the wording is a little strange, but I'm assuming the way the card works is that you choose a piece of ice, you choose a program, and then the runner can't use any of the activated abilities of that program. So that means like +1 strength or break an ice subroutine or things like that. I'm assuming that this card doesn't prohibit triggered effects, like say medium letting you access multiple cards. So this card, I'm not really that excited about it because it's a conditional piece of ice. It's going to have to be in front of another piece of ice to do something relevant. I'm not wild about it. It only lasts for the remainder of the run, which isn't that great. I am, however, in favor of giving Wayland cool new tools that have nothing to do with tag and bag. Wayland is in a really bad place in the current metagame, I feel, because its only real major archetype throughout the history of the game has been tag and bag. And I personally believe, and I know I'm not alone with this, that NBN is just better at the tag and bag thing than Wayland is. So Wayland is kind of lost at the moment. I don't think competitive tag and bag is really as popular. Some people are arguing it's coming back. I don't see that. I think you'd be better off just playing NBN. So I really want to see Wayland make a comeback as a Glacier style deck. As I feel like thematically that's what Wayland has kind of wanted to do with its curtain walls and its Hadrian's walls and its advanceable ice and its monstrous stuff, right? So I feel like that's a position in the game that Wayland has wanted to have but has never really gotten. And I think this card doesn't necessarily make Glacier Wayland competitive, but it is a card that's going to be better in Glacier Wayland than any other type of Wayland. So I'm in favor of cards like this. That said, it's not going to see play until we get some more of these Wayland Glacier things. Speaking of Wayland, the next card we have is a Wayland upgrade. It's called Crisium Grid. It's 3 to res, 5 to trash, and 1 influence. Successful runs against this server are not considered to be successful or unsuccessful for the purposes of card abilities. And it's a region, so limit one of these per server. Now, if you watched my last video on the spaces between, a subtitle to the Corp portion of the video could have been Willing Done Rags on Sealed Vault. And I was complaining about how I thought Sealed Vault was really narrow, and the only thing I could think of to use it against was like Vamp and Siphon, and how I really didn't like the idea that extremely narrow hosers were in the game, and I don't know, go watch the video. I had some ill-conceived arguments there. Now, this card has a similar sort of cheesy hoser feel, where it very narrowly stops a specific, like, you know, maybe 6 cards are the ones I'm thinking of with this. It's not very many cards that this card is really effective against. And like Sealed Vault, it's also 1 influence, which means that you could play either one of those hosers in essentially any deck. This card I have a much more positive feeling about. And this is the type of hoser that I think feels very Wayland. Kind of a theme of Wayland is that they just kind of circumvent and cheat the rules, right? With their Scorched Earth, they don't need to score and this kind of stuff. And if we were going to get an account siphon hoser, this is more the way that I'd like to see it look. So just briefly to go over what this card is going to be effective against, pretty much any card that says you get to make a run, if successful, some cool thing happens. So we're talking about like Siphon, Maker's Eye, Indexing, also things like Desperado and Data Sucker. These are all going to be turned off on the server that this upgrade is installed in, which is really strong. And the 5 trash cost just really makes this card good. The card doesn't prevent them from being able to still get into the server. So even if this card does its thing, like you res it against a Maker's Eye and they can't access the additional cards, they're still going to be able to access the 1 card that they get normally because they're still going to get to make the run. So this card costing 5 to trash when they get into the server is a really, really good thing. I like this card a lot. I think this is much more what I'd like to see instead of like Sealed Vault. Next up, we have by far my favorite card in the pack. Holy crap. I was just amazed with this card when I saw the spoiler. It's called Chronos Project. It's a 3-for-1 agenda. It is a research subtype, no influence. When you score Chronos Project, the runner removes all cards in his or her heap from the game. Now, to help explain some of my excitement, before we talk about the remove the heap ability, I want to talk a little bit about 3-for-1 agendas. I think it's fair to say that 3-for-1 agendas have been pretty underpowered in the history of this game. House of Knives was really exciting to me because it was a change in the 3-for-1 paradigm. It really ramped up the power level of what a 3-for-1 was capable of doing. And up until that point, I think only Gilahan's Arcology was even on the same level. We saw people trying to make false lead work. We saw people trying to make a variety of other 3-for-1s work. But House of Knives was really a paradigm shift for 3-for-1 agendas. Now, Chronos Project is the next step, I think, in this shift. The effect on Chronos Project is, first of all, unique and unreplicable with anything else other than this agenda. Second of all, it's good. It's a really powerful effect. Now, that said, this card is going to be situational. It is not going to fit in every deck. There's going to be a ton of decks that aren't going to even care about the effect at all. But in the decks that this card works in, it's going to be an absolute monster. At Gen Con in the National Championships, I played a personal evolution deck called Zaps. I played this deck and was in favor of this deck before this Chronos Project was spoiled. And when I saw this, I just immediately knew that the Zaps deck was going to get better, because the whole idea of the personal evolution deck is to make them discard a lot of their quality cards early in the game by using lots and lots of 1 net damage effects. The ability to remove those cards from the game, making them unable to same old thing, unable to levy AR, unable to deja vu for those cards, unable to test run for their icebreaker. Just the idea that you could remove the damage that you do to the runner from the game is so powerful and so good. And when it's tacked onto a 3-for-1 agenda body, I already play like 14 agendas in this Zaps deck. I think I'm going to have some room for another 1-pointer. I am really excited about this card, not just because it fits into one of my favorite competitive decks, but also because I think it shows a step in the right direction for 3-for-1 agendas. This is absolutely one of the best cards in the pack for me. This is one of the best designs I've seen on a card for a long time. I love the idea of putting powerful, unique effects on 3-for-1 agendas. I think agendas, period, should have powerful effects, and I'm really excited to see game-distorting agendas that aren't 3-for-2s, that just astro-script up to 7 points as quickly as possible. I'm pumped to see game-changing agendas that aren't just about getting 2 points really fast. Okay, moving on. We have a neutral asset. It is 0 to res, 0 to trash. It's an ambush called Shattered Remains. Shattered Remains can be advanced. If you pay 1 when the runner accesses Shattered Remains, trash 1 piece of hardware for each advancement token on Shattered Remains. So this is kind of the neutral, aggressive secretary for hardware. I've been a longtime opponent of playing low trash cost cards in your deck. I really don't like Melange Mining Corp. I really don't like playing cards that the runner can just trash if they access them in HQ or R&D. This is going to be another card they can just throw out if they access it. The thing that I think really holds this card back is right now there isn't a competitive deck that plays mass amounts of hardware. Maybe if there was some deck that had a bunch of hardware, like say 3 or 4 pretty consistently in play, and then blowing up all their hardware would just cripple them, this could be really good. But as it is, I don't see a lot of decks getting crippled by losing their hardware. If Andromeda loses Desperado, she's just going to get another one. If a prepaid deck loses a prepaid, they're just going to go get another one. You don't usually play one clone chip. You usually have 3. I don't really like this card. I think it's nice to have this card. I like the idea that there is a trap that destroys hardware. I like the concept of the card. I'm not going to play it. And finally, the last Corp card in the pack is Lancelot. It is a neutral piece of ice. 4 to res, 2 strength, 1 influence. It's a Century Grail Destroyer. So it has the Grail ability. I'll talk about that. And then it has subroutine Trash 1 program. So the Grail ability is when the runner encounters Lancelot, you can reveal up to 2 Grail Ice from HQ, and for the remainder of the run, Lancelot gains the subroutines of the ice you revealed, and you get to pick the order, which is kind of cool as well. The first thing to say is the only other Grail piece of ice that exists right now is Galahad, and that is a 2-cost barrier that all it does is end the run. So basically the 2 things that you can do with the Grail Ice at the moment are end the run and trash a program. Now, obviously, there are more Grail Ice coming out, and I won't say what their subroutines are, but I'm imagining, even if you haven't seen them, that you can guess kind of what they do. This thing's not bad. I had talked about in my last video, the Spaces Between review, that I thought the Foundry might want to play some of these Grail Ice because the Foundry's ability lets you search these ice up, and then that'll stock your hand full of Grail Ice so that you can get the maximum 2 subroutines on most of your ice. I think this is pretty comparable to like Roto Turret in that deck. I don't think there's really a huge disadvantage other than the influence of playing this over like Roto Turret. So I think it slots fairly well into the Foundry. I think this is going to be like with Galahad and like with the Foundry, kind of pending more cards being released. I don't really see a whole lot of people being willing to spend their influence on Galahad and Lancelot, especially if they don't have any way to tutor up additional copies of them. This is a good card. Its time is not yet. That's going to do it for the Corp portion of this pack. Make sure that you continue on to the next part of this video where I'm going to talk about the runner cards. There are a lot of exciting things in this pack for Corp. I think perhaps the runner side is even better. Thanks for watching, and please click subscribe and that button that looks like a thumbs up.